Welcome to the Down Dog Athletics Podcast, a competitor's guide to mental health and mastery. My name is Paul Klingon. I've known sports and training my entire life, but it wasn't until I worked on my mind that I finally started achieving what I believed I was capable of. When I combined mindful and spiritual practices to my already competitive demeanor, I gained a new level of clarity in life and traded my career at Amazon to start Down Dog Athletics. In this podcast, I interview top athletes and coaches to uncover the mindsets of top performers. You'll hear from doctors, authors, and experts in the health space as they break down how to take your mental health, physical health, and performance to the next level. And last but not least, you'll hear from me and my experiences and how I'm cultivating growth for myself and my clients, both mentally and physically. Let's go. What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Mindful Muscle Podcast. Paul Klingon here, your host. And I'm still getting a little bit used to the new name of the podcast, but it feels natural. It's kind of like getting a new pair of shoes. And the last pair of shoes you had, man, they were good. They set some PRs maybe in your run. Maybe you've had them for 10 years and they fit really well. Maybe not 10 years. That's a long time. Maybe it's just a year. I don't know how long anyone keeps their shoes these days. But now I'm putting on a new pair of shoes and they're shiny and they're nice and I love them. Just getting used to them a little bit. And so that's where we're at, Mindful Muscle Podcast. Hope you guys all enjoyed Monday's episode where I talked about why walking is sometimes better than running, especially for fat loss, but also for maintaining some muscle. Be sure and go listen back to episode 75 to learn about how beneficial walking can be, especially as we're all locked down. It's cold. Maybe you don't have access to a gym right now. And then I talked about the importance of gratitude, 2 practices that you can really apply to find some gratitude, right? We got Thanksgiving coming up. It's kind of a crazy year. I don't know if you've heard. And so really good opportunity to get the mind focusing on like, all right, what can I do? What is good about this situation? Why am I going to turn this, obstacle, this little adversity into a win, something that I'm going to learn from, something that I'm going to grow from. So go back, listen to that podcast. It's going to be a really good setup for this episode. Before I get to today's episode, to today's guest, who I'm super excited to dive into, pun intended, you'll find out why, the Mindful Muscle Group coaching program. Going to be launching it mid-December. Going to start taking applications really now. And if you're like, Paul, what is the Mindful Muscle Group? Well, great. Let me tell you. Train to grow is one of the pillars. Mindfulness for clarity of mind, lack of fog, stress, and then nutrition for fuel. And I want to help people combine those 3 things really to find not only the best physique of their lives, but also the most clarity, the best mindset that they've had themselves in. Maybe you're a former athlete and you feel stuck and you're like, man, I've been plateaued from a training standpoint for 3 years. I don't know what's going on. I'm not getting everything out of life what I believe that I can, and I've been there. I've been there several times. And every time I work with a coach or really dive into my daily routine, whether that's meditation, journaling, or both, and just sticking to that, man, there's so many powerful things that you can unlock. And so going to be doing that in group formats and one-on-one formats. And if you're interested in that at all and you're just curious, shoot me a message on social media, Paul_Klingon. Shoot me an email, paul@downdog.athletics.com. Well, let's just talk and see if it's a fit for you. Now, today's guest, Cory is a former Division I swimmer. You can see why I said we're going to dive into today's episode. Swam at the University of Delaware. He's a personal performance coach over on the East Coast, and he helps former athletes optimize their fitness, mindset, and overall life performance. So you can see how him and I are super aligned. I actually got the opportunity to be on his podcast earlier in the week, and so I'll be excited for that to drop in a couple weeks or so. He also hosts the Athletic Mindset podcast, and it's funny, he's interviewed some of the same people that I've worked with at Washington State from a mindset standpoint. So super cool guy, but I just love his story. I love his journey as an athlete. I love the adversity, and he's dealt with some crazy stuff from a physical ailment standpoint that really could have knocked him off his rocker. But the biggest thing that I love that he talks about is swimming your own race, and that's a principle that he took at a young age, still applies it to now, and can be applied in anything in life. So many times we look at our chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and we compare ourselves to someone at someone's chapter 20, 21, 22, and we say, oh man, I'm not as far as them. But we're all in our own book. We're all in our own journey. We're all on our own race in a way. And he talks about that and how he applied that to long distance swimming. We talk about identity and how that's a really hard thing for athletes to do, especially once you shed that identity, or maybe why you shouldn't shed that identity after giving up your sport, hanging up the cleats. And then we talk about what he does more than movement, which again, awesome dude, a lot of same philosophies when it comes to health and just bettering people. So without any further ado, We're going to dive right in the conversation with Cory Camp. Hope you enjoy it. I think the things that we always hear on maybe like Sports Center, ESPN is always like the Gardner Minshew, and that's just an example I hear from Washington State.
Yeah.
He was like I was going to quit. I was at Alabama, and then I was like, fine, I'll go play with Coach Leach, and the next thing I know, I'm a 10-win quarterback and I'm in the NFL. Like that story gets told, but not a lot of people can relate to that, right? That's a 1% of the 1%, and your story and my story and so many other athlete stories have a lot more. I think of like the movies, you see like the adversity that they have to face, and it's a little bit more, for lack of a better term, like a common man
Hmm.
experience that more people can relate to, right? I can't relate to being Derrick Henry and just running over people, but the I had the exact same journey where there wasn't a ton of offers on the table. You take the best offer there is available and whatever scholarship money there is. And for you, it's like, great, I can get to the next stage of what my athletic journey was like.
Hmm.
Um, so before we dive into that, I just want to hear your first experience with swimming and what got you into it and why that was something you were drawn towards at such a young age.
Yeah, great question. So for those of you that don't know, I ended up swimming at University of Delaware, but we're gonna bring it way back to like 4 or 5 years old. My dad was a collegiate swimmer as well, and has been historically a great swim coach in the Maryland, DC area. That being said, my mom was like, all right, we get he's your son. I'm the oldest of two. He's like, we're not pushing him into swimming. Like, we're going to take our time. That all changed one weekend when I was hanging out at the pool with my dad prior to summer when I'm 4 years old. And he's doing like the old school paper signups for summer swim team up at the front. And I was just like playing on the playground, which is near the deep end. Well, of course, being 4 years old, I got curious of what is this pole that's hanging out of the 12 feet of water? Well, it's a pool vacuum. If you're not familiar with that, it's got wheels on the bottom. I didn't know that. So I decided it would be a good idea to hang on to the pool vacuum.
Oh man.
As soon as I did that, the wheels on the bottom went, they moved. Next thing I know, I'm hanging on to a pool vacuum, 4 years old, never learned how to swim. And luckily my dad heard like the splash, swam the entire length of the pool, fully clothed, like saved me, so to speak. And that was the turning point where my mom was like, all right, I know we said we weren't going to push him into swimming, but like we should probably put him in swim lessons. So I found myself in swim lessons like 2 weeks later. And it really just stuck from there. I luckily had no like lasting traumas of this experience where I had a distaste for the water. I was just drawn to it. And I wouldn't say I was naturally good at it. I was good. I wasn't great, and I just felt at home though when I was at in the pool in the water. And
Yeah.
it's funny, we've talked about, I experienced baseball too for a little bit at the same time, and came to a point where it was choose baseball or choose swimming. I was actually better at baseball at the time skills wise, but I liked swimming more, and so I chose that. And I, looking back on it now, it's like I think I made the right choice.
Yeah, definitely. I'm super excited to get to your experience as a Division I swimmer and beyond and what you're doing now. But some of the things that I find really interesting is just like how people get to their journey, and not even just their journey, but their story, right? The story that you share on your
Mhm.
podcast with your clients and how you relate to people in a ways like that foundation is layered. And one of the big foundations that we have is our coaches, right? The coaches, and sounds like your father was kind of your first coach. Was that harder or easier? Obviously, you don't know much of a life without your dad being a collegiate swimmer, but do you think that that helped you at all, having like that like push and that expertise?
Definitely, because he did a phenomenal job of making sure that like it was a good balance there. It
Yeah.
wasn't, I never felt pressured that there was higher expectations because my dad was my coach. And for context, he was my only summer coach, but the way that swimming was working was like I was on upwards to 3 to 4 different teams at a time. So like he was the coach of one of the teams, but it was actually the least competitive and the least serious of all the teams that I was on. So I think that also helped. It wasn't like he was my age, like national age group level coach where I was seeing him on pool deck with me 8 times a week for every single practice, and it wasn't that intensive. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, totally. It's a good balance between them being able to point you in the right direction. And like looking back, I wish, not I wish, like how cool would it be to have like Ken Griffey Sr. as your
Mm.
dad? He's like, hey, you want to come to the clubhouse and hit BP on the big league field? Like you're going to get a taste for the highest level of competition. But it sounded like he was able to be like, hey, here's the direction you should go, push you, but then kind of be hands off, which is a great, talking about coaches, someone who's able to like point you in the right direction and let you kind of go and excel and spring up as you would.
Yeah, there's actually a story that stands out with that experience. I was 12 years old, 12, 13, and I was working really hard. I always had a really good work ethic, but I wasn't seeing the results in swimming. And my dad tried to like come out of that parent side and like come into coaching side, and actually sat down with my coach and was like, hey, like I see how Cory's acting in the pool. I see he's exhausted all the time. Like he's working his tail off and he's not getting the results. What's missing? Like, what can we do here? And my other coach, thankfully, was like, look, he's doing all the right things. Just give it time. Like that breakthrough will come. And it was at that moment that my dad really kind of like really dialed back in the amount of advice he gave me. Everything became more like take this mindset approach to your race rather than technique focused. And I think that balance, looking back on it now, is like a super important conversation that they had. And fast forward 2 years later, like that was when my career started to like explode, and Division 1 became a reality instead of just this dream that it was for so long.
Yeah. The dichotomy between be patient, you've got time, and you're in high school, you literally have no time is so interesting because there's literally that sweet spot window where coaches are recruiting and you want to make sure you put up your best times or have your best averages or have your best scores. Sounds like you almost peaked at the right time. Like what was kind of what got you onto the radar from a collegiate coach's perspective?
That's a good question. It was really my end of my freshman year and sophomore year. Times just like dropped like crazy. It was one of those like every time I went out for these big meets, I was nothing's guaranteed, right? Like you're not guaranteed a best time ever, but it seemed like I was just in such a flow state of like, dang, I can't wait to get up and race again because every time I do it lately, it's a best time. So you just like build that momentum, almost like when you're experiencing uh, a really good like hit streak. You know, it's like every time you step to
Yeah.
the plate, like
Or
it's
even
bound
just
to
in the
happen.
gym. Imagine going to the gym and every single time, like, sweet, I'm going to add 10 pounds to my bench. Like, that's going to be pretty motivating to get in there.
Exactly. And then at some point it doesn't happen. I was fortunate that like I had such a boom in my performance that after my sophomore year, I actually didn't really do any best times in my main focus events. The end of my junior year and my whole senior year. Like it went back into that dry spell of, okay, when is it going to happen? And the interesting part about swimming is, unlike other sports, you peak and you taper for really 2 meets a year. So essentially, you have 2 opportunities to go these best times where all of the stars align and your body hair is all shaved and you're ready to go, right? You're ready to show up. It could be super awesome when it goes right, or when you go through that whole process, train, taper down, get ready to peak, and you don't peak, you don't go PR, then you're left just sitting there waiting for the next opportunity. But that next opportunity is not until another 6 months away. It's like, how do I deal with this? So I was starting to navigate that like my senior year. As I was getting recruited, as I was doing all these things, I wasn't going best times. It was a little stressful.
Yeah. I remember that happening. We talked about on your podcast. I dated a swimmer in college, and I remember
Mm-hmm.
that process. I see she's like shaving her legs. They're getting this like fancy suit that's supposed to be like a submarine and just streamlines everything. You're getting like haircuts, getting your nails, like everything is literally like this is going to be one millionth of a second, but it matters so much. And I would be so confused. I was like, how are you shaving 3 seconds off? But I remember a couple different times where it just didn't land. And that's the thing that is so interesting, kind of the difference between swimming and other sports is that baseball, for example, there's a game the next day. You're
Mhm.
probably going to get an at bat later on. And so you're going to get another chance versus something like swimming or a marathon, something that you build up and train for, and then you have that taper period. Do you feel like that creates more stress and anxiety for that big moment, or do you thrive off that?
I learned to thrive off that. That was something that I really prided myself in, especially in my collegiate career. I got really good at disconnecting from what the results were in season. And I knew that like when the lights were on and it became time to show up at conferences or at that end of the year taper meet, like I was on top of my game and I was going to go a best time that, or pretty dang close to one, and set up the team to help support them best to ultimately hopefully win. So yeah, I think that's something that I learned to thrive on. It wasn't always the case. It was for a while. It was all right. These random meets, I would somehow go close to best times or best times in events, and then it came to the big meet, and it was like I couldn't beat that time. So it took me a while to learn how to navigate that extra pressure of knowing
Yeah.
like now's it, or you wait 6 months.
Would you say that you learned the concept of disconnecting from the results or even just the patience in the process at a young age in high school? Like part of me right now is really jealous that that clicked for you then. It sounds like I want to have you
Yeah.
tell me though.
Yeah, definitely. One of the times I'll always remember, I'm 14 years old and we're driving to this meet, my dad and I, called Junior Olympics, and it sounds like it's a way bigger deal than it is. Like every state or few states has them. But that's the big taper meet, like when you're at that age. So we're driving there. It's the first session, and this is his shift, right? Out of like more coaching towards mindset than technique. He just looks at me and goes, "Cory, like whatever you do tonight, swim your own race. That's it. Just worry about what you can control and swim your own race." And I'm like, I'm listening to DJ Khaled. All I do is win. I'm like, yeah, dad, cool. Like, I'm just gonna like put my headphones back in and jam out to this. It wasn't until that night I get in and I'm swimming the 1,000 freestyle, which is about a 10-minute race. So there's so much dichotomy in there that so many different factors that come into play, right? It's a continuous effort. It's not just one effort. I swing the bat and I either made contact or I didn't. It's I need to continually show up here for 10 straight minutes. The guy next to me takes off. I'd never heard of him before in the program. He's actually a good friend of mine now, Brady Welch. He just takes off. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like every bone in my body wants to take off with him. But I thought back to that moment in the car and I was like, that's not me. Like that's not the way I swim. The way I swim was I'm just gonna like continually chip away and have enough in the tank at the end. If I'm close to someone, I'm gonna I'm gonna beat them. And I had luckily held within my framework and was able to just chip away slowly at his lead throughout and ended up winning the race in the end. That's one example where like the outcome was exactly what I wanted, right? Like I won. But there's so many other times where I had to get really okay with I could go best time and I could not win first place. And it takes a lot to accept that because we're all competitors, right? We want to win, but swimming is one of those rare sports where it's time based, so you can always compare yourself to previous you, and I like that about it, honestly.
Yeah, I remember had Sam on the podcast. And he talked about how running's fair. Things that are time based are fair. There's no, oh, the wind knocked the field goal left, and so it went off the post.
Mm,
There's no that was an arbitrary foul or that wasn't, and that's something that I like about running because it is time based and you're actually able to see the measurable progress. But that said, you also can't see the progress of like a taper or when you also have to mentally prepare yourself like, all right, I'm intentionally going to go slow right here. And there's a
mm,
strategy to it. One of the big things that myself and so many people that I'll work with is they're like, wait, I need to recover for a day. I need to take a day off and just walk. Like I'm supposed to do a hit this or like go crazy for that. And I think that that balance is something that maybe athletes have a little bit easier time understanding. But one thing that you were talking about that is just so important is, and this is going to get into more of like life concepts, but people get out of the gate faster. At least in
Hmm.
swimming, everyone starts at the same place. But imagine if someone had their block like 7 yards ahead of you and you're like, I'm so far behind. But in reality, you've already swam 20 meters further and you're pacing faster. I want to spend some specific time later on in the podcast talking about business, but the concept of not comparing yourself to where people are at early on in the race.
It's a tough one. It's a
Super tough.
tough thing.
Super
Yeah, it's
tough.
a
How do you
tough
do that?
thing to. How do I do that? It took a long time to really trust my own processes and my own work ethic and what I do really well, and that was enough to compensate in the big picture, so to speak. So when that happened, it was like, okay, how do I stay cool? How do I stay level headed and not let the race get away from me? That was the biggest thing that I dealt with through my whole swimming career. Was I wasn't the fastest. I was a distance swimmer, like through and through. Don't ask me to sprint. I'm not good at it.
Yep.
But ask me to swim a mile. Fantastic. I got you every day of the week. I'll do it.
I'm the same way. I'm slow twitch fiber city. My trainer in
It's,
college used to like make fun of me. She's like, that's the worst power clean I've ever seen. I was like, yeah. Ask me to
you're
do
like,
push-ups for
yeah,
20
like
minutes. I got you.
these two poles don't go together. They're
Yeah,
two different things. So
exactly.
exactly, like, it's managing that, right? It's knowing what you actually do really well, and it's leaning into your strengths. Now, there's times in my career where I doubled down on my weakness, so to speak, of trying to develop faster twitch muscle or the front end speed. And when I was able to do that, then that's when it became like game over. I really started to win at a much higher level. But yeah, it was facing or just knowing what my strengths were and playing to that. And then knowing that, like, all right, well, in the moment, I can't do anything in the competition, in the race, to change that I'm not faster on the front half, but I can do everything I can within my control throughout the course of this race to set myself up best to finish in a personal best time. And that's kind of the duality that I faced for years.
Yeah, 100%. It's looking back at all the work you've done and trusting that it's going to get you where you want to get, and
Mm-hmm.
bringing it back to like life. You can look at someone's fitness journey, someone's business journey, relationship journey, right, on social media and be like, oh, I'm so far behind. I do this all the time. And I just have to like get in my journal and be like, all right, I was at this point. I was now at this point. I trust the work ethic. And I love how you said that. It's like, I trust myself.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the biggest one is I trust myself to not stop. Would you say that's kind of like how you, or trust yourself to like stick to it?
Yeah, definitely. It's all about trusting yourself, and it's really tough. Social media is the perfect example of you can fall into that comparisons game every day, and you can find yourself comparing your chapter 1 to someone's chapter 30 or whatever it is. Doesn't matter where you are in your journey. So trusting yourself helps dial it back in to be like, okay, this is where I'm at. I can see what these other people are doing and kind of get a little preview of maybe what's to come, and use that as more of a motivation and like appreciation. I look at, you brought up Sam Tooley earlier, like phenomenal coach. I love what he's doing. I want to do everything, I want to do a lot of stuff that he's doing, but I have to also keep in mind that he is a few chapters ahead of me,
Yeah.
both age wise and in business wise. He has way more experience. So what can I take away from his content and what he puts out in the world and how he shows up, and apply that to how I show up and my own strengths, and kind of learn from there? That's going to set me up to be the best version of me. And that's ultimately what life's about. That's ultimately what business is about. It's what sports is about. How can you be better than you were the day before?
Yeah, dude, so good. I love that comparing chapter 1 to chapter 30. That's a really good way to phrase it.
It's hard to do. I mean, everyone wants to skip ahead to that end of the book, but how many times if you read the last chapter of any book, and I'm pointing off to my right here because that's where all my books are, but if you read the last chapter of any of them, you have no idea what's going on
Yeah.
most of the time. You get maybe a small gist, but you need to experience each of those chapters along the way, because each of them have this theme, these integral parts that are going to determine your success. And you might just not be ready for someone else's chapter 30 yet.
Yeah.
You need to experience it for yourself.
Yeah. One of your chapters that I want to dive into that is, I think, super powerful, and it's going to connect with a lot of people, is the chapter of your heart condition and just like what that experience was like. Because I think that the other thing that happens too is people just see what you can see and you don't know what's going on behind the scenes that is, creating an even greater hero's journey.
Yeah, that was a really interesting time. And quite frankly, I never thought about it until you asked me, dealing with like, did I peak at the right time as far as recruiting goes? So a few minutes ago, right along the time my senior year where I'm plateauing time-based wise, I start developing this unknown heart condition. And I remember it started off one Saturday morning. We're doing some sprints in like a 15-yard deep end well. So it's not even a full length. You just hop on the block, dive in, swim as fast as you can, 15 yards, pop out on the bulkhead, which is like a divider between the deep end and the shallow. And you're supposed to walk to the end and get back in line. Well, I remember hopping up on the block and like, something's not right. My heart rate is racing a little bit more than normal. Okay, whatever. I'm just going to like grit it out. I'm just going to like do the sprint anyway. So I do the sprint, get to the bulkhead, I pop out of the water, and I'm like, all right, something is really off. I'm starting to kind of see like black dots around me. Can't really see everything, but it starts to get like tunnel vision. Being 17 at the time, I thought it was a good idea to just like walk the bulkhead, essentially like walking the plank of a boat. And I was like, I just need to get to the side of the pool and I'll be fine. I can worry about whatever this is when I get there. Well, as I'm doing that, my last step, completely black out, like can't see anything. And my left foot goes into the pool and I actually face plant onto the pool deck. And to me, I was like, this is the scariest thing ever. I have no idea what's going on in my body. Like all these red flags are going off. To everyone around me, it just looked like I misstepped. Like no one else knew that my heart rate was doing that. No one else knew that I was losing vision. Only I knew that. So I'm like I come to pretty quick. I'm like freaking out. I'm like, I need to go to the ER or something. And even like my coaches are like, are you good? Like, are you sure? I don't think it was that big of a deal. I'm like, no, I'm telling you, like it was. And it started a really frustrating part in my life because I went to the ER, did all the heart tests, EKGs, you name it, nothing. Everything came back positive. They were like, you are a glowing athlete. Like at this point, I'm an aspiring Division I swimmer. I have a few offers coming in and they're like, you're good. Like, stop. I think this is just made up. I'm like, no, I promise you, something's happening. And for a few months, really, I bounced around from cardiologist to cardiologist. I was going to GW here in DC. I was going to Georgetown. I was like all the best doctors, all the best cardiologists trying to figure this out. And every single time they were like, we don't know what this is. Like, you're probably fine. And I was like, yeah, but it keeps happening now with more intense frequency at swim practice. And it only happened at swim practice. So fast forward about a year, and I'm like going into now sitting down with the college coaches and we're like discussing scholarships. And I was like, man, this is how I ended up choosing Delaware, honestly, as my school. Is I sat down with the coach and I said, hey, just so you know, this is what I'm dealing with. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknown around my own performance and my own health. I promise you when I'm healthy, like I will give everything to this program. And even while I'm dealing with this, I'll give everything to this program. It's the best of my ability. But I wouldn't be able to sit here and ask for any money in return without being upfront in that. And he goes, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out together. Like, this is what your offer is. We would love to have you. And I signed like 2 days later. But yeah, that was an interesting journey. I went through my whole freshman year still dealing with that. And it wasn't until actually a family friend recommended a cardiologist up in Delaware and said, hey, we think this might be what you're dealing with. And it was like an experimental surgery that I went through after my freshman year conference meet, where they put me under and they said, hey, there's like a 50-50 shot. We find out what's wrong with you and we can treat it on the spot, or we just put you under for like to find out still don't know what it is. And at that point, I was just like, you know what? Screw it. Let's put me under, find out what's going on. And luckily, they were able to correct the problem. I had AV node reentry. You'll appreciate this with your background. I had certain cells on my AV node that short circuited, and instead of completing the normal traditional circadian route in your heart, they went back to the SA node and refired. So it was kind of like jump starting my heart over and over again.
Oh,
And my
wow.
heart rate would spike up to like 300, 350 in that range. And blood pressure would drop, which was why I was experiencing the loss of vision, loss of sensation in feet and hands.
The
But yeah,
Did you ever play Mario Kart growing up?
yeah,
Do you remember being able to like short circuit some of the maps and like cut everyone? That's what I
yeah.
pictured when you said they were just like going around the track doing their node loop, and they're like, "Nope, we're gonna go back
Yeah, we're
around."
just going to start back over, which
Oh
sounds like
man,
super cool,
yeah. Until
except
you're
for when you're
passing out,
experiencing it.
dude. That's crazy. Just at least too when they said, "Hey, 50% chance it works, 50% chance it doesn't." I'm picturing like 50% chance it works, 50% chance you lose your control of your right arm. Like that would be like that would be like even a worst case scenario. But I'm definitely glad that that ended up working out.
Yeah,
Um,
the other option they gave me was I could take like medication. This was an early on option, but the medication would have limited my overall heart rate. So like beta blockers. So they
got
were
it.
like, you could take this, and I was like, I can't be the best swimmer that I want to be if I'm on some medication that is
Yeah,
literally limiting my physical performance. So I'm happy the bet on myself paid
yeah.
off there, and here we are.
It's like the governor they put on golf carts. It's like, no, I want to go fast. Don't slow me
Exactly.
down.
Exactly. But not too fast. I learned that the hard way.
Yeah, totally. Uh, so, couple things I want to touch on just before we get to like what you're doing now with more than movement and the way
Mhm.
that you serve the world. About the identity, and you talk about it a lot. It's something that I've talked about a lot, and I think it's super interesting. Is the identity shift that an athlete goes through after being an athlete, whether it's college to regular. You can almost even think of it as like I'm thinking like military to civilian life, Olympian
Mhm.
to regular person. What was that journey like for you, and how does that influence how you help people along their transition?
It's a great question. I love talking identity because it's a sticky subject. It's a tough one to talk about, and it's something that not a lot of people like to admit that they have an issue with identifying a certain way. And athlete is no different. The longer that you are doing it, the harder it is to shed that identity. And I'm a firm believer, honestly, when swimming stopped for me, I was under the impression that I needed to completely shed that identity and not embrace that side of who I was. And I didn't for a while. And that made the shift even harder because it felt like I needed to completely reinvent myself on the other side of athletics. I needed to get a successful job. I needed to be the man at work and make a lot of money. And it was like, no, I don't need to do that. What I really need to do is tap back into my why. And why is it that I want these things? It wasn't until I started to do that inner work, which I think you speak on a lot too, with like the light and dark side. I touched on, okay, there are so many intangibles that swimming taught me that still apply to what I want to do now. How can I start to apply them in a way that makes sense and it's within reason, within the new framework? It's almost like I was given a new game to play and they changed some of the rules, but not all the rules. How do I show up and still, now I need to, there's a learning curve in that new adjustment. So I think that was a tough journey at first. I tried to completely shy away from it. My degrees in exercise science and coaching science. And I was like, I'm going to do sales because that's the fastest way to success. So I did that for 9 months, and then it was like, wait a second, this is not who I view myself as either. I view myself as a coach. I view myself helping others. How can I do that? And that's when I pivoted back into the coaching realm, first coaching swimming, and then adding on like the fitness side of things. Okay, let's work on helping other people with their fitness journey and their physical journey.
Do your days feel lighter now versus when you're in sales?
100%. And it's funny because now that I've started the entrepreneurial life, right, these past few months, I'm still in sales. Like I need to make sales of new clients or programs or whatever to survive, but it doesn't feel, it's not coming from an external pressure. It's not a boss telling me you need to hit this quota or you don't have a job, which is good and bad, right? Like if you're really internally motivated, then you're going to thrive in that scenario. A lot of people don't pan out in entrepreneurship because they need someone else telling them this is the deadline. You need to do it by this date. And that's when, if you're a smart entrepreneur, you hire a coach to set that structure for you. Um, but yeah, days definitely feel lighter. I don't feel the pressure to make a sale because I'm really ultimately the why behind everything that I do is how can I best serve someone and give them what I've learned through my own journey over the years here.
Yeah. What do you say to people that feel like what they're doing now is just a total slog? And there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of rhetoric around go chase your dreams, which I think makes sense if it's the right type of person. So, how do you help someone delineate the difference between you're just not in the right role or job for you versus you don't need to go start your own thing? Maybe you just need to find something that's more aligned with your
Mm-hmm.
identity.
Yeah, it's getting clear again on who you are because there are some phenomenal players, and we can circle it back to athletics, right? There's phenomenal like star players, but there's also career like journeyman like role players in whatever sport. And entrepreneurship, career, like it's no different. There's going to be people that are going to make phenomenal number ones, CEOs of companies. There's also going to be people that need to understand that they're probably better fit in that number two role or even the number five role of the chain of command. And like they can really thrive and do that. And then it's getting a clear understanding of like, all right, what I'm doing now, it's a slog, it's a drag, whatever. How aligned of is it with my like ultimate mission? So if you have that final destination in mind, yes, maybe it sucks right now, but maybe you need that experience. Maybe you need to embrace it and learn what you can from it to then move on to the next. I wouldn't be the coach that I am today if I didn't have that experience in sales. Hands down. I needed to have that struggle and that learning curve there to then learn some skills that now I apply every day as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting analogy. I think the first name that came to mind was like a Kevin Love, where
Mm-hmm.
you can go and be a number one, number two on the Timberwolves, and you're never going to win anything, or you can become a number four and absolutely crush. And a journeyman who plays 20 years in the league makes a lot more money than someone who's a number one for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really interesting way to put it, and something that now I'm like, oh, I wonder if when I'm 45, I'll be like the number two with my best bud but we're just like crushing it and winning championships, or will I be like the number one? It's a very interesting question. Glad that you brought that up. Question with that to dive a little bit deeper into that is, how do you help someone assess what they're best at? Because in a team environment too, I like coming back to video games. Is some people might be really good at sales and really good at marketing and just trash at the admin side. And so it's like,
Mm-hmm.
stop trying to be good at that. You're not good at that. Like, stop trying to rebound. Go outside and like guard their point guard. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a difference between not being good at it and not having tried it enough to like realize that you're not good at it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I don't play video games often, so like I'm trash at Call of Duty. But like could I be good at it? I haven't put enough effort and hours into it to know whether I truly am just garbage with hand-eye coordination and a controller or I just haven't practiced enough. So what I always encourage people to do is play around with stuff, try it out, and give it a fair shot. And that's where it gets really tricky. how much time do you spend where it's a fair shot, and how much time is it that it's like you're banging your head against the wall and you're not going anywhere? You know
Yeah,
what I mean? So
100%.
it's how do you navigate that? One of the best advices I ever heard was from Jay Shetty. Sure, you're familiar with him,
Yep.
but he talks about one of the ways to help discover your purpose is let's go from like every weekend for 2 months, you go and try something. Maybe it's a new career, a new hobby, something like that, and be really open minded about it and give it an honest effort. And then assess afterwards, how did you feel after doing it? Think that's a good piece of advice for people getting into it. The other thing too, like as we're doing this, you mentioned like you're really good at coaching and showing up, maybe creating content, but you stink at the admin stuff. Unfortunately, when your job description is like your own boss, you need to know how to do the admin stuff and kind of suck it up for a little bit, but you need to know it well enough so that when you go down the road to delegate it to someone else, you know what you're talking about and you're going to get like a fair deal that way. So yeah, I encourage everyone to have a well understanding of their business if they're in the space like you and I are.
Yeah, absolutely. More than movement, kind of built up to it. How are you helping people and really showing up in the world right now? And what are you excited about since there's so many more chapters to come?
Dude, there's so many more chapters, and I'm focusing on the current one is building out this group concept that I call More Than Movement. And what it is really it's a 10-week intensive program where we take personal development and it meets physical fitness. And essentially, what I do is I sit down with former athletes and we assess where they're at in their life, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. And then that kind of determine where, depending on where they score and where they're at, that determines their experience for that 10 weeks. I have, you and I'm sure, know people that are physically in phenomenal shape, but mentally they're just not there or where they could be. And then vice versa. It's like I know people that are mentally phenomenal shape, but there's some sort of disconnect in their physical either appearance or their physical abilities or their actions. And it's like, how can we further align people to make sure that they are, clear on what their goals are, but then actually taking the action to make that a reality instead of just staying stuck.
Yeah, dude, that's such an interesting way to look at it. And I was having a talk with some people yesterday, just the concept of how you do one thing is how you do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing I love about like training in the gym and fitness and whatever, like, type of exercise you choose, whether it's swimming, running, going to the gym, it's if you can learn to do that one thing really well, like trust the process, not miss meals, not miss workouts. And then you just start to build this habit and this identity of like, all right, I do this in this arena. And then it like bleeds into so many other things, which is why I think it's cool that you still keep the fitness part in there. So many people touch on,
Mm-hmm.
all right, we're just going to do just mindset or just business coaching. Sometimes I'm like, well, like the foundation of it all is taking care of yourself, right? And so when you can get someone to like be able to be the CEO of their body, then and their mind, then they're going to go and like blow up in so many other areas.
Yeah, and that's why when I work primarily with former athletes, and we talked about identity earlier, your physical shape is such a part of your identity. And I think that's why so many former athletes feel lost post sport is they threw themselves so into these other areas, they lost sight of who they were physically. And I'm sure you have former teammates. I have former teammates that I look at and I'm like, are you sure that you and I we swam at the same level or we competed at the same level? That's part of it too. I think if you can get back into it, into shape, your confidence automatically skyrockets because you're like, okay, this is familiar. I'm used to feeling this way. It takes a reframe of knowing, like, all right, maybe I'll never be able to do X exercise like I used to, but I know it's beneficial and serving me in a bigger picture. And that's why I named it More Than Movement, because movement's an essential part of it, but it's bigger than that.
Yeah, totally. And you ran a marathon this year, right?
I did. Not as fast as you, but I did.
A marathon's a marathon. I think running longer marathons is harder. I was talking to my friend's wife who ran a 4 hour one by herself, and I was like, "That's harder than what I did. You were going for a whole another hour."
Yeah, my marathon experience was interesting. I decided um, in March of this year, I'd run a 5K. It was like the furthest distance that I ran. So I did a 5K. And the next weekend I said, you know what, let's do a 10K. Just like did 10K. And then I did a 15K the next weekend. Then I ran a half marathon the next weekend. I was like, oh, everyone was telling me this like was really hard. And the half was like, okay, it wasn't that bad. And I preface this by saying, like, obviously my training background and my
Right. That's what I was
swimming
just
training
about to.
background prepared me better than most to be able to do this. And the next week I did another half, and I thought to myself, you know what? I might as well do a full. So I committed to doing a full less than a month after running my first half. And where I messed up was I did a 16-mile run, a 20-mile run, and then 6 days later decided to run the full.
Oh wow.
And my full started off in pouring down rain for the first half marathon, essentially. And yeah, it ended up being like 4:15, 4:18. It's the finishing time.
The
And those last few miles, man, nothing's worse than like seeing your pace significantly slow down over it. Is just a mental mind game, which is exactly why I wanted to do it.
Absolutely. It's funny. It's a couple things I took away from that. It's like you see the importance of training, right?
Yeah,
People are like, "Oh, I can just show up and do it." And I used to be that way growing up. It's like, no, like a training block's important, but then the taper, which you knew, right? You got to taper down and do it.
yeah. And
Um,
I knew it and I didn't do it.
but but how cool is it that you know in college you're like, "Am I ever going to swim again because of this heart condition?" And now you're just like, YOLO. I'm just gonna go run a marathon, even though I haven't really trained for it. Like that's cool.
So it was pretty cool. I didn't run my full in DC. I decided to do it at the beach because I thought it would be better being flat, which it was, but it was really monotonous in its own right. All my training, I was doing it through DC in the middle of this pandemic here, and I made it a point every single training run, the longer ones, to run by one of the first cardiologist offices that I went to when I was dealing with this unknown heart condition. So it kind of came full circle, and it gave me an appreciation every time I passed it. I would pass it on the way out, and I would pass it on the way back home, and my thought was just like, man, that's crazy. 7 years ago, 8 years ago, they told me that I needed to shelve swimming and that I just needed to give up this part of who I was. And here I am in the middle of a global pandemic, proving them wrong and just going out and just making my own dreams a reality. So that was a cool full circle moment there in the training.
Absolutely, dude. That's super cool. And I'm glad that you're able to come out on the other side of that and you'll have that now. It's like anytime you run into someone who's like, "Hey, I don't know if I can ever do this again." It's like, "Hey, we don't know how." Like the specifics we can't figure out now, but we do know like that it's possible. And so that's super cool that
Yeah.
you're able to tell that story. Few personality questions just to kind of mix it up before I let you go and hopefully enjoy awesome Thanksgiving coming up. But you just finish like a really long practice in the pool, maybe 3, maybe 4 hours. What is that one meal that you just crave and you're like, I need to smash this right now?
Man, I'm just big on breakfast foods. Like I'm easy to please. Like
Love that.
there's nothing better than one. There's nothing better than going to the dining hall like post college workout and having someone else cook it for you. I will say like the omelet ladies at University of Delaware, man, shout out to them because they made the best omelets, and they would always look at me like I was insane because I was a skinny 155, like 5'10", because I was a distance swimmer, but I could eat like no other. And I'd go up and I'd be like, hey, I'm gonna take 12 eggs scrambled with like this in it. And they're like, son, we can't make you that much food at once. I was like, trust me, like I just swam 3 to 4 hours, like you said, like I'm good.
There's a chicken
I'd go back for
shortage. Like
seconds.
we don't have that many eggs in the fridge there. You don't understand. Oh man, that's awesome. I love breakfast too. I'm like trying to put on weight post marathon, so I'm doing a bunch of carbs and every day it's just like pancakes, waffles, bagels, and it's a
It's
good
a good
life.
life.
It won't be a good life come January when I gotta cut down on that. Um, Ultimate like pump up song. You're getting right before like this the biggest meet of your life. What's the one song that is just gonna get you hyped?
Mm. I love Sabotage by the Beastie Boys.
Okay. Have you seen are they're still alive, right? Maybe?
I believe so, as far as
Okay.
I know.
Have you
But
seen them live or
I have not. But what I love about that song is it like starts off, it builds pretty quick, and then like there's that weird part in the middle where it just like kind of goes down and then
Mhm.
it comes back and it just hits again on the back half of things. And to me, that was how I swam. It was like I needed to get off to a good start, and then the biggest part was like, how do I not get lost in the middle? Still stay attentive and still stay at the pace that I need to, and then hit it hard on the backside. So that song is a great representation of how I swam, and it was a perfect pump up song to remind me, okay,
Yeah,
this is who I am, and this is what I do good or
that's
do
cool.
well.
I haven't thought of it that way. There's a couple songs like Greyhound by Swedish House Mafia kind of does the same thing where like super pumped and then it just like dies and it comes back and it gets me hyped. That's my go-to song. The as a swimmer, would you say like who's like your favorite swimmer of all time?
That's a good one. I could take the easy cop out and say Michael Phelps, but um, all time, I would say I love Ryan Lochte. He was someone that I looked up to with his work ethic. And I just remembered like videos of him training down in Florida and being like in high school. And I'd see these videos of him throwing kegs up in the air. And like, I was like, that's the kind of training that I want to do. Like, that
Yeah,
just looks so cool and so badass. So he was always someone that I looked up to and still look up to, despite his mess ups throughout the years
yeah.
here.
Would you rather spend the day with Ryan Lochte or have the Beastie Boys play at your wedding?
Mm. Day with Ryan Lochte, I'd
Okay.
say.
All right.
It just be. I don't know if you ever saw. He had a reality TV show on E for a little while called "What Would Ryan Lochte Do?"
No, I'd
If you've,
banned E from the house. Had my mom put the child controls. No, I'm just kidding. My girlfriend gets plenty of E and Bravo, so I've probably seen it.
it's a number of years old now, but highly recommend. Highly entertaining. Just like I'm. I don't know about you. I love like garbage TV in my downtime because so much of what we do is just like needs to be on and present and focused. I love being able to just throw something on in the background that's so light and doesn't require me to critically think.
Yeah,
And that TV show kind of falls into that category.
yeah, absolutely. You need that slow down and just kind of chill time. Dude, thank you so much for the time, man, and sharing your story. Super powerful, and I'm excited to connect. Sounds like you might be coming to the west side, the
Oh,
dark side,
thank you, man.
sometime
Thank
soon. So we'll
you.
have to connect.
Yeah, come on. I'm most likely gonna end up in LA, so it'll be a little bit closer than we are now.
Yeah, definitely. All right, man. Thank you so much for the time. All right, party people. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to today's episode. I hope you guys got something out of it. And if you did, shoot me, shoot Cory, tag us both in the podcast. Let us know that you listened and that you got some value out of it. And leave a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. That helps me grow the podcast, helps me to continue to connect with other people, brings it up in the charts, brings mindfulness, brings health, brings wellness, brings mental health up into the forefront. Don't get me wrong, your serial killer documentaries and all those podcasts are fascinating. But just want to spread the love a little bit. So 5-star rating review, would love that and appreciate that. If you have any questions regarding today's podcast, regarding the Mindful Muscle program that I'm going to be launching, or you just want to chat and connect, shoot me a message. Paul@downdogathletics.com is email. Paul_Klingen on social media, or you can go to the website downdogathletics.com and contact me from there. Other than that, hope you guys all have an awesome weekend. And I'll have a Mindful Muscle episode on Monday, and then you guys will get Thanksgiving, and I'll have a guest for you guys there. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you guys next time on the Mindful Muscle podcast.